The PlayStation 1 was home to some of the most experimental RPGs ever made. Games that didn't just tell stories, but reinvented how stories could play. These weren't your typical turn-based adventures or dungeon crawlers. Each one dared to mix genres, twist mechanics, or rewrite the rules entirely, creating experiences that still feel strange and refreshing today. From monster taming to psychological horror to romantic comedy hybrids, these are the games that proved innovation doesn't need power, it needs imagination. If you end up liking the content, please subscribe for more, and I'd appreciate it if you give it a thumbs up and tell me what you think down below. Love to hear it.
Employment.
At a glance, Grandia might look like a cheerful, traditional JRPG, but underneath its bright colors and upbeat tone lies one of the most inventive and influential combat systems ever designed for the PlayStation. This redefined what turn-based battles could feel like, transforming them from static exchanges into fast, dynamic skirmishes that required timing, awareness, and strategy. It wasn't just unique, it was revolutionary. The brilliance of its system lies in its IP gauge, a timeline that determines when characters and enemies act. Every move, spell, and attack occupies a point on that timeline. By watching it carefully, you can interrupt enemy actions, delay powerful spells, or chain your own attacks for maximum efficiency. Combat feels alive, almost real-time, without losing the clarity of a turn-based system. It's a design so good that other RPGs, from Final Fantasy X to Child of Light, would later adopt and refine it. Visually, it was also a marvel of design. Its 3D environments and hand-drawn 2D characters created a vivid, layered world full of personality. The camera smoothly followed characters through towns, airships, and dungeons, giving every environment a cinematic sense of space. The battle animations were expressive and detailed, with more energy than most games on the system could muster. But what truly makes this special is how it ties gameplay to tone. The combat, exploration, and story all share one common goal: wonder. Every mechanic encourages curiosity and optimism. You're not fighting to save the world out of duty, you're exploring it out of love. The leveling system rewards consistent use of abilities, encouraging experimentation rather than grinding. The entire structure feels built to support discovery. Few RPGs have managed to make turn-based battles feel this thrilling. Every victory in Grandia felt earned, every interruption perfectly timed. It proved that even within old formulas, there's always room for evolution. If you took a monster collecting game, a roguelike dungeon crawler, and a town building sim, threw them into a blender, and somehow made it work, you'd get Azure Dreams. Released by Konami in 1997, it was one of the most inventive RPGs on the PS1, built around a gameplay loop that constantly changed with every run. What made it special wasn't just its systems, but how naturally they blended together to create something addictive and personal. You play as Ko, a young adventurer climbing the mysterious monster tower that looms over the desert town of Mons Beah. Every floor is randomly generated, every descent wipes your progress, and every run forces you to adapt. The twist: you don't fight alone. You can capture and raise monsters called familiars, each with unique stats, evolutions, and personalities. Unlike other games, your monsters aren't just tools. They grow up with you, sometimes even developing emotional bonds. But the dungeon crawling is only half the story. Between expeditions, you return to Mons Beah to invest your treasure in rebuilding and expanding the town. You can fund new shops, unlock side stories, and even develop relationships with the townspeople, including several potential love interests. Watching your town evolve as your reputation grows gives this game a living, breathing sense of progress rarely seen in the genre. What's wild is how ahead of its time it was. Procedural generation, base building, pet raising, social sim elements, systems that would define indie games decades later. We're already here, tucked into a charming PS1 title with pastel visuals and a cozy, adventurous tone. It's messy, unpredictable, and utterly fascinating. A game that constantly rewrites itself with every climb. Azure Dreams wasn't just unique, it was visionary. A game about loss, luck, and growth that felt truly alive every time you started over. If there's one PS1 RPG that truly stands apart from anything else, it's Tecmo's Deception. It wasn't about saving kingdoms or defeating monsters. It was about trapping them. You didn't play the hero. You played a man falsely accused of murder, executed, and resurrected by the devil himself. Your mission? To guard a cursed castle by luring intruders inside and using deadly traps to destroy them. It was unlike anything else of its time. At its core, it was a game of strategy and manipulation. The castle was your weapon. You placed traps, spiked floors, swinging blades, exploding boulders, and triggered them manually as enemies walked into your carefully constructed gauntlets. Every intruder had their own motives and moral shades. Noble knights, desperate thieves, and innocent adventurers all wandered in, forcing you to decide whether to kill, spare, or enslave their souls. These choices affected the story's branching paths, pushing you toward different endings depending on how you used your powers. Technically, it was a marvel of ambition. The game used full 3D environments long before most developers had mastered the hardware. You could roam the castle freely, watching enemies react dynamically to traps and terrain. The lighting was moody and atmospheric, and the soundtrack, a mix of choral chants and dark ambient tones, added to the sense of dread. But what really set it apart was its morality system. This wasn't a game about righteousness. It was about temptation. Killing certain enemies could strengthen your pact with evil, while sparing others could hint at redemption. Every decision had weight, and the psychological consequences lingered. You weren't just building traps, you were building your own downfall. It inspired an entire series of trap games afterward, but none matched the eerie tone or mechanical boldness of the original. Tecmo's Deception turned the power of fantasy on its head, asking what happens when the player becomes the monster. By the time Wild Arms 2 arrived, the PS1 was saturated with fantasy RPGs, but none quite like this one. It took the classic JRPG structure and injected it with cinematic storytelling, innovative combat mechanics, and a distinctly melancholic tone that made it feel unlike anything else on the console. If Final Fantasy was high fantasy, this was a modern myth, rooted in dusty frontiers, crumbling technology, and quiet human stories. Its systems weren't loud, but they were smart, and their subtle complexity made it one of the most unique RPGs of its era. The battle system was the first hint of its brilliance. This used a force point mechanic that rewarded patience and timing. Instead of just spamming spells, you built up energy with basic attacks, and then unleashed devastating special abilities when a gauge filled. Every move became a tactical decision. Risk your FP now for a quick advantage, or hold it for a game-changing attack later. It gave every encounter a sense of rhythm and restraint, turning turn-based combat into a kind of emotional pacing. Outside battle, it embraced puzzle-solving and exploration in ways few RPGs did. Each character had unique tools, special abilities used to interact with the environment. These weren't gimmicks. They turned dungeons into elaborate puzzle boxes that made you think, not just fight. Narratively, the game, instead of clear-cut villains, it asked what evil really means in a broken world. The antagonists weren't demonic forces. They were reflections of humanity's fear and hopelessness. This thematic depth made the story hit harder, and its dialogue, translated with surprising nuance, gave everyone emotional character. Visually, it pushed the PS1's limits with its use of fully 3D environments and 2D character sprites, bridging the gap between generations. Wild Arms 2 was never the loudest RPG on the system, but it might have been one of the most quietly daring. Most RPGs in the 90s wanted to make you feel powerful. Codelco wanted to make you feel uneasy. This gothic horror RPG blended turn-based combat with cinematic storytelling and survival horror atmosphere. Long before that was a common idea. It was moody, eerie, and philosophical. A game that felt like Resident Evil collided with Final Fantasy tactics in a haunted monastery. The story follows a cynical medium drawn to a decaying Welsh abbey filled with restless spirits and dark alchemy. But instead of random encounters or overworld maps, you explore the Abbey like a survival horror game. Fixed camera angles, limited lighting, and real-time exploration. Every creaking hallway, every distant echo contributes to a thick, oppressive mood. And when combat triggers, the game shifts seamlessly to a grid-based battle system, where positioning, weapon durability, and physical range actually matter. This blend of cinematic horror and tactical RPG design was groundbreaking. Battles are slow and deliberate, demanding that you manage weapons that can break, healers that can run out of supplies, and magic that drains your stamina. Each victory feels earned, and every mistake is punishing. The pacing gives combat emotional weight, mirroring the dread and decay that define the story. But the most unique system of all was its tone. This used full voice acting and cinematic direction rarely seen in RPGs of the time. The dialogue was fairly sharp, adult, and full of tension. The moral and religious themes cut deeper than most PS1 stories, touching on faith, guilt, and human cruelty. Technically, Koudelka pushed the PS1 with its detailed backgrounds and moody lighting. But artistically, it pushed boundaries few dared to approach. It wasn't afraid to be slow, strange, or unsettling. It wasn't trying to be fun, it was trying to make you feel something. And that's exactly what makes it unforgettable. Square was experimenting heavily in the PS1 era, but few experiments were as charming or as strange as Threads of Fate. It's an action RPG that plays like a fairy tale, with a dual protagonist story and some of the most creative mechanics on a console. On the surface, it's a lighthearted adventure about finding a powerful relic. Underneath, it's a game about transformation, both literal and emotional. And it expresses that theme through some of the PS1's most unique gameplay systems. You can play as one of two characters, Rue or Mint. Rue can transform into any monster he defeats, turning enemies into tools for combat and puzzle solving. A mechanic that makes every encounter feel experimental. Each form grants new abilities, like flying, swimming, or casting elemental attacks, encouraging you to mix creativity with strategy. Mint, on the other hand, focuses on magic crafting and spell combination, letting players customize her abilities through experimentation and item collection. Two different characters, two distinct gameplay styles, one shared world that changes depending on your perspective. The structure feels almost like an early Zelda cross with Mega Man. Combat is fast, exploration-focused, and full of secrets, but its real beauty lies in tone. Threads of Fate looks and moves like a children's storybook brought to life. Soft colors, rounded environments, and expressive characters animated with surprising warmth. The camera angles shift dynamically during action sequences, making the world feel cinematic without losing control. Beyond its mechanical creativity, it's also deeply character-driven. The dual campaigns tell two sides of the same story. Together, they form a surprisingly emotional narrative about loss, identity, and purpose, all told through humor and heart. Threads of Fate didn't get much attention when it launched, overshadowed by bigger titles like Chrono Cross and Vagrant Story, but it quietly proved that small ideas can have big resonance. By the time Breath of Fire 4 arrived, the PS1 was nearing the end of its life cycle. But Capcom used every bit of that experience to craft one of the most visually unique and mechanically refined RPGs of the generation. Where other games pushed realism, this leaned into a style that gave the illusion of a living, hand-drawn world. And beneath its gorgeous exterior was one of the most flexible, creative battle systems of its era. The game alternates between two protagonists, Ryu, a wanderer with the power of dragons, and Folu, an ancient emperor reborn into a dying world. This dual narrative is baked into the gameplay structure. You switch perspectives between light and shadow, destiny and rebellion, giving emotional context to every battle you fight. Combat itself mixes turn-based tactics with fluid, combo-driven execution. Every skill and spell can link to another, chaining attacks in sequences that reward planning and experimentation. Characters have unique support abilities that stack, making synergy more important than grinding. It's about building a rhythm, a flow that makes battles feel like choreography. Then there's the Dragon Transformation System, a series hallmark refined to perfection here. Each form of Ryu's dragon power can be customized with gene combinations, allowing players to shape not only his abilities, but his very nature. This fusion of flexibility and identity gave this endless replay value. Visually, it's still breathtaking. The soft watercolor palettes, dynamic camera angles, and expressive character models made it feel more like a moving painting than a PS1 game. And the music, ethereal, percussive, and tinged with Eastern influences, cemented the game's dreamlike tone. Breath of Fire 4 stood out because it trusted its systems, offering depth without complexity and emotional storytelling without excess. It's one of those rare RPGs where art and mechanics work in perfect harmony, a quiet masterpiece of design and soul.
Parents were killed in the forest. All he's ever
If
thought about
Pokemon was about capturing creatures, Jade Cocoon was about understanding them. This PS1 gem merged monster raising, turn-based combat, and spiritual storytelling into something hauntingly beautiful. Beneath its surface as a creature-battling RPG lay a world rooted in myth and melancholy, a story about life, purification, and the cycle of nature. Its systems were as deep as its themes. You play as a cocoon master, tasked with capturing corrupted creatures known as minions and purifying their souls. On paper, that sounds simple. In practice, it's one of the most complex and rewarding monster systems ever made. You could merge any two creatures to create hybrids, passing on stats, appearances, and elemental traits in endlessly unique combinations. These weren't just reskin versions of the same monster. They were genetically unique beings, shaped by your choices. No two players' teams ever looked the same. The game's world was equally unique. Instead of sprawling towns and continents, Jade Cocoon focused on a single, self-contained village surrounded by mystical forests. Each forest was a maze of shifting paths, filled with monsters that grew more corrupted the longer you explored. Battles used traditional turn-based mechanics, but each monster's elemental balance demanded tactical awareness. Even healing and purification became strategic, as using magic too often could leave you vulnerable to corruption yourself. The mood was dreamlike. The Ghibli-inspired art direction gave every environment a softness, while the music, both ethereal and tribal, created an atmosphere of spiritual tension. It wasn't a game about saving the world. It was about healing it. What made Jade Cocoon so ahead of its time was how personal it felt. The monsters you created weren't disposable. They were reflections of your playstyle and moral choices. It's the kind of game that sticks with you. Few RPGs blend mythology, emotion, and genetics as seamlessly as Jade Cocoon. If you think you've seen every RPG twist imaginable, Thousand Arms will prove you wrong. It's one of the strangest and most endearing hybrids of the PS1 era. Part classic JRPG, part dating sim. It combined traditional turn-based combat and adventure with romantic dialogue choices, relationship mechanics, and comedy straight out of a late 90s anime. The result is a lighthearted, self-aware, and surprisingly deep RPG that was completely unlike anything else on the system. You play as a flirtatious blacksmith with the ability to forge magical weapons, but only with the help of women he's bonded with emotionally. Each of the game's female companions can go on dates, and the stronger their relationship, the more powerful the weapons you can craft. It's both a hilarious gimmick and a clever mechanical system. The dating sim elements are surprisingly robust. You can take characters on different outings, answer branching dialogue questions, and even witness unique cutscenes depending on your choices. It's not just fluff. The affection system directly affects combat performance and weapon upgrades. That blending of social interaction and mechanical depth was years ahead of what games like Persona or Fire Emblem would later perfect. Combat itself was also unconventional. Instead of controlling a full party at once, this uses a frontline system. Only one active fighter can attack at a time, while the others provide support from behind. This encourages swapping characters mid-battle, making each encounter more tactical and character-driven. Visually, it was bursting with personality. Expressive anime-style portraits, colorful 3D backdrops, and energetic animations that made even the simplest dialogue feel alive. The writing balanced humor and sincerity, poking fun at genre tropes while delivering heartfelt moments of growth and friendship. Thousand Arms may sound like a parody, but it's secretly brilliant, a blueprint for social RPG mechanics that would dominate the 2000s. Shadow Tower showed the darkest heart of the PS1. Released in 1998 by From Software, the same studio that would later create Demon's Souls and Dark Souls. This was one of the most punishing, atmospheric, and mechanically bizarre RPGs ever made. Its design was so strange and forward-thinking that it laid the groundwork for an entire subgenre of modern dark fantasy RPGs. At its core, it's a descent into madness. You begin at the top of a cursed tower and must fight your way down through dozens of interconnected floors filled with monsters, traps, and despair. There's no music, just ambient noise, footsteps, and the unsettling groans of unseen enemies. Every sound matters. Every shadow hides something lethal. It's the PS1 at its most minimalist, and somehow that makes it terrifyingly immersive. The mechanics were as ruthless as the tone. There's no experience system. Instead, stats increase based on your actions. Swinging a sword improves strength, casting spells raises magic power, and so on. Weapons and armor degrade over time, forcing you to scavenge constantly. There are no shops or merchants. Every resource must be earned, looted, or discovered through exploration. And because there's no map, you learn to navigate through instinct and fear alone. Combat is slow, methodical, and brutally deliberate. Sound familiar? Its DNA can be seen clearly in King's Field before it and Souls games after it. Every encounter is a test of patience and precision. The game won't hold your hand for a second. Graphically, it's raw but impressive. The claustrophobic first-person perspective, dynamic lighting, and thick atmosphere create a sense of oppression unmatched by most horror games of its time. For players who could endure its cruelty, Shadow Tower offered an experience like nothing else. Not just a descent into darkness, but a grim prototype for the Souls-like era to come, built on PS1 hardware and pure creative nerve.